Lord your God. The Lord your God won't test anybody, and we're not to test him. But here it says, test me in this. This is the one thing that we can test God with. So what does it mean to test God? How?
See if it's true.
Yeah, put him to the test.
I don't have enough money for tithe. I can't pay my bills, or I don't have money for food. And he's saying, test me in this. You give me your first 10% and watch me provide for you in my ways for your food, your clothing, and shelter.
And that's what he says. It says, test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and the vines in your fields will not cast their fruit, says the Lord Almighty. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for you will be a delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. So, here's the promise. God says, God says, you can test me in this one. That is, you can do it, and God will always prove it. You can go back to God and say, God, I'm going to test you and you to see if your word is true. And so the test here is to give God that 10%. And yes, many people, think, it's like, whoa, man, I don't have enough money to pay for my needs. How on earth can I give God 10%? But God says, test me. And I will show you that if you do this, I will open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have enough room for it. That means that he promises to not only give you enough, but to give you more. And then notice the examples. I will prevent pests from devouring your crops. Now, if you're a farmer, one of the major sources of loss is pests coming in and taking away. You may have a crop of 100, let's say, corn. Let's say you have 100 ears of corn. Worms could easily consume up to 50% of it. Can consume a lot. So think about it like this. In your work that you do. So none of us here are farmers. But when we work, the principle is the same, because we can get stuck on things and they will take us time and we have to keep on working and working and we just can't seem to solve it. And we can't seem to get ahead. Well, the promise of God is that when we give the tithe, he is going to make sure that pests don't just devour. So he's going to protect us. He's going to help us. And he says, your vines will not cast their fruit. So fruit won't come off early, so they won't mature. They'll grow to their biggest and to the point where they're valuable, where you can sell it. So what he's promising is to help us in our work, whatever that work is, and we can put him to the test. So, in the Old Testament, this was a promise that they were to test God with all of their increase, that is, all of the income that they earned by working. They were to give God 1/10 of it. And this was their worship to God. Now, at the same time, just like we saw with the first of the firstborn of the flock. In order to do this, it takes trust. It takes faith. Because you don't know for sure that you're going to have enough money. You don't know for sure that that sheep is going to have more. I'm giving you the first one, but God has promised that He will provide more. And that is an area that is a command that requires faith on our part in order to obey. But there is a promise that goes with it and a blessing. So let's keep moving through these other forms of worship that he spells out here. Then he says, not only is there tithes, but there are special gifts. So going back to Deuteronomy, he says your tithes and special gifts. So these would be gifts that are above and beyond that 10%. Okay, so can you think of, without looking at my little notes there, I gave some away. So what were some biblical examples of special gifts?
Well, when he asked them to bring, like, Moses, Moses, Aaron first, when they did the calf, that was bad. But then Moses asked them to bring their, anybody who could bring gold, and then later on, anybody who had purple cloth. And those were, he didn't ask them to say how much, it was just a free will, whatever was on their heart to give, and they took that and they built the things that the Lord had asked them to do.
Yes, that's right. So they gave, they were free will offerings, and they were for a special purpose.
For example, like when we did the angel tree in Ohio.
That's right.
That's above and beyond tithing, but
that's
if
right.
you had it in your heart to give to some of the families who weren't going to have a Christmas.
That's right.
And like the Operation Christmas Child that we did this year.
That's right. So when there is a special need, like in the Old Testament, the building of the tabernacle, there was a need for the materials. God said, bring these things. Whoever wants to, bring and donate. And remember, we just read through that in Exodus. It got so much that they had to say, stop. You brought too much. So that's a great example of giving. Joseph, you had a question or comment?
No.
Okay. The special gifts. Yeah, David.
I noticed they called it something like that, like a wave offering, or is that what it's called, or is that something else?
Yeah, so a wave offering was, a wave offering is one that would not be, like, killed.
Oh, okay.
So often there's different kinds of things that were wave offerings. So sometimes a grain, and sometimes an animal, or sometimes items. As they were given to the Lord, they were like waved in His presence, and they were given, and then those would be items that were either holy for the priest to have as part of their income, or it would go into the storehouse. And sometimes wave offerings would be also a part of a fellowship offering. So they would eat it there in the presence of God. So it wouldn't be one that was like wholly consumed, but it's waved, given, so it's a form of demonstration giving so that it can be used and shared.
Okay.
So we have these special gifts. Also, in 2 Corinthians 9 and in other places in the New Testament, there was a problem in the church in Jerusalem. So after persecution broke out, all of the Christians who were left in Jerusalem were being persecuted. They couldn't work. They were impoverished, completely poor. So Paul went around asking for money and gifts to bring back to Jerusalem, to send to